Amen. In verse number 12 of the book of Genesis, I text somebody about coming to church and they said, why? I started to write back because you're on your way to hell, but I didn't. Come on now. If you think living for God at home, you can do it, you're fooling yourself. And if you think you can live for God and feel like God has spoken to you against his word, it is a lie. It's amazing how diverted and how twisted God has to look at us and how Satan has twisted us. Verse number 12 of the book of Genesis, if you could stand in honor to the Lord, I'd be appreciative. And God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. I'm going to go back to verse number 12. Hang on with me. And let him have dominion over the fish, and over the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Verse number 12 says, and the earth, everybody say earth, brought forth grass, not in Clovis, but the earth did. And the herb yielding seed after its kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. You may be seated. If somebody would thumb over to Matthew chapter number 5 and verse 45, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you for standing in honor of the word of the Lord. As I flip over to Genesis chapter number 26 and verse number 17. Verse number 17. And Isaac departed thence and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar, and he dwelled there. Listen to this. And Isaac dig again the wells of water which he had dug in the days had stopped them after the death of Abraham, and he called their names which his father had called them. Somebody got Matthew 5 and 45.
I thought you said 25, Pastor.
I'm sorry, it's 5 and 45.
That you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous.
I want to look at something this morning. We have heard it preached all of our lives, but maybe not necessarily. I love how the Bible started out. How many are retired in here? One, two, three.
Well, I don't
know. Semi. There you go. You know, the reason why I asked that is this. How many remembered your first job? Your very first job? I mean, the one that you actually got a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
How many remember that? Can anybody remember how much that paycheck was?
Not much.
It wasn't nothing. Not enough.
Now, the other thing I would like to ask is, what was the wage in which you worked for?
For chump change. I don't know.
I remember making donuts for less than $2 an hour.
Oh, yeah. I did that.
There is a law Brother Marvin, of reaping and sowing. Now, some of you were born with computers. But I look at the old Underwood typewriters, the ones that had the ribbons, the ones that you would trick and take the ribbon all the way out, turn it upside down to get more life out of the ribbon because you didn't have the 10 cents or whatever it was to go buy a new ribbon. And I remember them typing. I remember when the first Smith chromatic typewriters came along and you could go faster because of the ability that you didn't have to push so hard. And I remember wanting a baseball glove. I remember it was $6. And I remember going out and with a bicycle and a lawnmower and a gas can tied on. We didn't have edgers and weed eaters back then. They hadn't come out yet. And I would go and I would have a hoe tied to it, and I would go up and down the street knocking on doors asking to mow their yards. And maybe I would get $2, maybe. And then you had to cut the grass out of the cracks and against the concrete with a hoe, and you would clean up their yard. And matter of fact, you would sweep the yard and you would make sure there was no grass left anywhere, and so on and so forth. And I remember how hard it was. But there is a law that cannot be divided, and there's a law that cannot be put asunder, and there's a law that cannot be taken and done away with. From the beginning of being thrown out of the garden, there was a law that said if you were going to eat, you see, the days before you ate of the trees and God supplied. But now that you're out of the garden, man, you will supply your own food. And man began to take, and he planted. And if he had oxen, he would use oxen. And he would raise his cattle, his sheep, his goats. He would raise. And if he raised fruits and vegetables, he would trade some of his fruits and vegetables for your meat. My dad told me even in his growing up, they would pick beans and cotton, and they would trade the beans and cotton for somebody else's things. The law of sowing. You and I did not have the opportunity to look at the amount of money you were offered on that first job. You just took it. And I remember there was no smoking on the job site at all. You got 2 breaks, one at 10 and one at 2 o'clock. And back then we only got a 30-minute lunch. If you were going to do your smoking, you did it then. And you didn't socialize in the mills and in hard labor. You went there to work. Somebody said the other day, I don't like my place of business because nobody likes me, and there's issues at my job. You didn't go to your job to make friends. You went to your job to make money. It doesn't matter if you got any friends. Huh? We have somehow turned from a law of sowing. Sowing isn't easy. Matter of fact, we have several boxes of patterns, thousands of patterns. but we have nobody to give them to because nobody sews. Isn't that interesting? When I was growing up, there wasn't nothing I had that wasn't sewed. Mama sewed everything. Grandma sewed better. Like my stepdaddy's mama, Grandma Ketchum, she sewed. Man, that lady could sew. Man, she'd make you the prettiest Western clothes. She'd make you a full-line suit. She could sew. But there was labor involved and hours involved to get a product of a suit. I believe it was my sister Chris that sewed something on her first thing and was so proud of it, or maybe it was Susan, but it was one of them. And they came out and something didn't quite look right. The two halves were sewed together, but they wasn't equal. My sister was so talented, she caught the home economics room on fire, making cookies. That was the first fire drill we ever had that was real. Sewing is something that I kind of like. You take and you till the ground. You break the ground up, and I always pick the axe one side and then pick the axe the other side, so I would build up both arms. One wouldn't become more dominant than the other. And I enjoyed, Brother Marvin, even putting the little holes and sticking the seeds down there and you put the dirt back on it. I enjoyed that part. I didn't have any problem with putting water at the end of the hoe or the row, and the row always ran downhill to a certain extent, so the water would run. Hang on with me. I know I'm boring you. But it wasn't the breaking of the ground, and it wasn't the excitement of the seed. It was the boredom and pure work of keeping the weeds out so the plants would grow up and we would have whatever it was that we had planted. And you would have to go out, and you would have to, back then, you'd have to kill the bugs by hand, and you'd have to, y'all don't remember those days, because the flies and the bugs would eat up your fruit and the leaves. There's a law of sowing that tells me it's hard work. Many times in today's society, you ask somebody to do that, and they say it's too hard. Huh? Kids, grandkids, employers, employees. There's employees that go to the job, and the old guys still got to do their work because they're too lazy. And I want to tell you something. The lazy person, when there's a cut down in force, never gets stayed on. He automatically gets removed because he's not a good sower. If you're not making your employer money, you're costing them money. And they can't keep you around if you cannot do the job in which you're hired. There's a law of sowing. There's a law in the Bible that they went out and they bared seed. I like some trees and some fruits and some vegetables and some things. Ever so often, Brother Marvin, we did not, listen to this, we didn't pick the apples on our orchard in New York. And you weren't allowed to pick the cherries, and you weren't allowed to pick the pears. And every year it would be a different tree, and you had to leave that. What they wanted it to do is they wanted it to drop to the ground. And they wanted it to rot into the ground. And they wanted the seed to get into the ground to sprout up more apple trees. Or more this or more that. There was a law that the Bible gave of reproduction. I'm going somewhere. How many have kids that came home and on the first job they wanted the same furniture you had? They wanted everything you had. They did not recognize that you worked all your life for the little bit that you have. and never will be a millionaire and may never have anything. But they always want something better than Mama and Daddy had. The problem is they want it to become instant. The first thing they do is go down and buy a car because they haven't learned that if you don't make the payment, you don't get another one. But Mama and Daddy learned that you got to pay one off to get another one. There's a law of sowing, and there's a law of reaping. There's a tree that fascinates me. If I can find some water. I know I'm not running around jumping. I believe if I did, I'd probably fall down. It's called a Chinese bamboo. Have you ever heard of it? The Chinese bamboo fascinates me. It is relatively more than just fascinating. They go out on day one, Brother Marvin, and they break up the ground, and they pull the weeds, and they put the seed in the ground. And day two, they go out and they water. Not only do they water, you got to hear me because I'm going somewhere. They had to fertilize. Day two, they watered and they had to fertilize. When the stuff that we grow, we water and put the seed in the ground and wait for it to come up. But not the Chinese bamboo tree. It's different. And day three, you had to water and fertilize and break up the ground. And day four, you fertilize and broke up the ground. And on and on and on and on for 5 years. You watered and you fertilized. And you kept the weeds away for 5 years. And the ground was still the ground. In 5 years of labor, in 5 years of being in the sun, in 5 years, all you did was water and fertilize. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I ain't watering and fertilizing nothing for 5 years. Just telling you. But I'll never have a tree either. I'm going to tell you something. I don't know how many of us can grab the concept of the sowing and the reaping. For 5 years, literally every day. Every day. Every day. 5 years. But after 5 years, Brother Marvin, a little tiny sprout pops out the ground. You ever watched the plant pop out of the ground? I don't know how it does it. The little tiny leaves, the little tiny plant somehow pushes the dirt away so it can pop out. But listen to this. In 5 weeks, everybody say 5 weeks.
5 weeks.
After 5 years, the tree grows 80 feet tall in 5 weeks. Now I'm going to ask you a question. In 5 weeks, did the tree grow 80 feet? Or did it take 5 years for the tree to grow 80 feet? Now, as you ponder that for a moment, I have gone to God, and I have petitioned God, and I have asked God, and I have faith in God, and I have, and I have, and I have, and I have, and I have. Until I'm tired of watering, until I'm tired of fertilizing, and I give up on the idea of what I asked God for. There was a woman down in Phoenix who went to our Glendale church way back when. And for 30 years, she went to church. Listen to this. And for 30 years, she got beaten when she got home for going to church. Husband was a rotten alcoholic, blacked her up. She'd be back Sunday night. She'd go home from Sunday night. She would be beat again. In 30 years, she did not quit living for the Lord. Now, I'm not telling you that's right or wrong. I'm just telling you the story. And in 30 years, she kept praying for her husband. Think about it. And after 30 years, God got a hold of him. And he went to church. And he went to the altar. And he received the Holy Ghost. And he was baptized. And in 6 short months became a very powerful preacher of the gospel. I don't know if they're still alive. But his testimony was never give up on the person that you're praying for. Never give up. Because he said in one instant, God took the alcohol away, that abuse. And in one moment's time, he changed me. And right now, his name escapes my mind. He had red hair, and maybe my sister remembers. And she had one of them hairdos that stood that high in Kenya. It's right there on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, he lived for God. What he did was wrong. And I'm not telling anybody to stay in an abusive relationship. What I'm telling you is your prayer, no matter how boring it becomes, no matter how repetitious it becomes, no matter how many times you pray it. Listen to this. Sometimes you pray that same prayer and you can't even remember if you prayed the prayer or not. Oh, you ain't hearing that.
No, I get it.
I've prayed over the same thing so many years, and when I'm done praying, I don't know if I've mentioned that one to God, because my mind automatically asks. Listen to me. It's not going to be a miracle until the miracle happens. God never promised you it would be tomorrow. I'd like to see my kids in church.
Amen.
I'd like to see them living for the Lord. I'd like to see them on fire. So much ability.
Yes.
But I'm not going to keep. I got to let it go into God. And I pray every day, God, could you get a hold of my kids? Could you just get a hold of them? God, somehow, but year after year, Brother Larry, it goes on and they get worse. And I think, God, am I just praying on this? Am I praying in vain? I'm just saying words. Hey, old minute. It's not the law of growth that we have a problem with. It's the law of the waiting. Starting a new church is not easy. They come and they go. They come and they go. And they come and they go. Difficult times we've gone through. My God, I've prayed over and over and over, God, somebody to help us. Somebody to help us get programs. Somebody to help us teach. Somebody But I got to keep praying, Brother Marvin. Sometimes you just want to quit. Sometimes you just want to stop.
Yeah.
But listen, when you stop your prayer, the seed dies. You better hear me. The seed must die and turn to a powder. My daddy always used to put the seed in and let it wait. He wouldn't put water to it. I don't know if it's right or wrong. I know nothing about it. I go to the store and get mine. But he'd leave the seed without water. He'd just leave it in the ground. I don't know how many days it would be, but he would say, son, it's time to put the water to it. And he would always put it up about that high. And he said, son, we do that so the water will go up into the seed and we water from the bottom up. Don't know anything about it. I have turned them stupid, I don't even know what you call them, stupid plastic lines. Back then they were aluminum or steel or something. At my uncle's farm in Wilcox, and we turned them stupid things. You'd dip them in the water and flip them over and they'd start siphoning. You know, now we got things that do it automatically. But back then, what do they call them, Brother Larry?
We used to call them irrigation tubes.
Simple enough for me. All I know is we'd be out there all day long. I think he farmed 200,000 acres. And for all the time we were there, for so many hours, in different patch of ground, you'd turn them things over and start water. Just big old irrigation going by. And then he started a pecan farm. And for whatever reason, he inbred something, and I don't remember what it was, with it. And he'd pay us so much to go pull the weeds so it didn't choke out the plant. The law of sowing may take a long time, but the benefit of the reaping, how long are you willing to pray? How long are you willing to hold on? To see the fruit of your labor grow before you into a monstrous tree and be fruitful. God, how come my neighbor don't come to church? How come this one came and then left? How come this one came and then went there? How come they come and they go? Not everybody that starts with God is going to finish with God. But I pray one thing, that if you started a long time ago and you didn't live for the Lord, that you live for the Lord now. Because today is the day of salvation. For today is the day, is the acceptable time of the Lord. God, teach me one thing, never to quit watering and to quit fertilizing. For God, that which I have planted, it's a law that it's going to sprout. You plant it, it's going to sprout. And I know we live in an age that we believe that it doesn't take a long time in prayer. I've heard preachers preach, oh, we don't have to tarry on something like we used to do. I don't believe it. I'm sorry. I believe there's times that you've got to intercede. There's times that your gut comes out. There's times I used to hear my grandma, my daddy's mom, pray for her children. We shared a room. When she came to my house, we shared a room. I was grandma's favorite. And she had had numerous strokes, and she couldn't talk. Her tongue was really thick, and she kept a rag over it, and she wrote everything. Most precious woman I'd ever met, and probably still to this day. And she would get down beside the bed, and of course, I was an ornery kid, but I knew how to honor prayer, and Grandma, I prayed anyway. I don't know if God heard anything, but I was down there praying. And Grandma, from a mumbling, misunderstood voice, would talk just like me and you, just as clear. I marveled at it as a kid. And she would pray, and she would call out the name of her children to be saved. And Brother Marvin, I was just a little boy. Y'all say what you want to, but it wasn't till we buried my daddy. I was already married, and my kids were grown. So I was probably 38 or 40, somewhere around there. Daddy passed away. Grandma passed away. And they didn't live for the Lord. Sister, at the funeral, my aunt received the Holy Ghost. And her daughter Linda, they lived in Camp Verde, she got the Holy Ghost. And my cousin got the Holy Ghost. And that death started a revival in that family. And it swept through that family. And the people, the grandma, I heard her pray when I was only 10. All of a sudden, Grandma never seen it. But God saw it. Don't ever give up on your watering and your sowing. God will bring your children home. Maybe you won't see it, but you don't need to see it. You just need to know that they're going to make heaven their home. You know, I'm going to tell you something. You sit here, you don't have the Holy Ghost. If you don't have the Holy Ghost, don't go home without it. Don't die without the Holy Ghost. Nobody wants to go to hell. We don't talk about it anymore. But that seed in your heart needs to grow. It may have been planted 30 years ago, and you may have never lived for the Lord. But I beg you to seek the Lord and receive the Holy Ghost.